Good morning. Hello, marketers. This is the Funnel Lab, and welcome to Funnel Lab Fridays. Funnel Lab Fridays is a weekly LinkedIn Live session where we dive into use cases and challenges for data-savvy marketers. I'm your host, Eric Westerkamp, CEO of CaliberMind, and joining me today are Brian Knaupe of Celigo and Nolan Garrido of CaliberMind. And today, Brian, Nolan, and I are going to be talking about sort of simplifying the buyer journey for sellers using AI, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. So welcome, Brian. Welcome, Nolan.
Yeah,
Brian, it's great kind of getting a CaliberMind, a two-time CaliberMind customer here on the show. Can you maybe just start by just doing a quick introduction of yourself?
sure. Hey, nice to see you too. My name is Brian Canopy, and I run our growth operations teams, which is sales, marketing, operations, and our BDR teams at Celigo. Celigo is an enterprise iPaaS where we integrate and automate business processes from marketing use cases, including connected to CaliberMind, HR use cases, quote to cash, really any part of your business. And so we are excited to be here. And this is really the first company I've worked for that we can actually use the product myself as a main consumer of it. So,
That's awesome. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how kind of Celigo is planning to use a marketing decision engine to kind of help you guys make better decisions.
yeah. So it's interesting. We say Celigo, but I've been a two-time customer, as you say. We've used it for the last 60 years. So I've seen it evolve and I've seen sort of the possibilities with this. And for us, there's really two parts to this. One, we believe in full transparency with our sellers and our go-to-market team. So the first objective was to really try to triangulate all of the customer signals that we see across really from the dark funnel to the funnel that typically sellers don't see because it's tucked away in marketing automation, all the way into the sales engagement. So that's the first, is really make it clear around all of the customer engagement that's relevant for the seller. And the second is really to see the complete picture of what's working. So for the operators who are trying to drive engagement and demand for this really fast-growing market that we're in, is really trying to understand what's resonating with our buyers. How do we make sure that we're providing the right context and content to really bring them through the funnel and into the sales team?
That's great. Recently, you and I talked about that sort of creating transparency for sellers and marketers. What, like, when you think about that, and you think about your customers' buyer journeys, what's some of the challenges on understanding the buyer journey and then, helping your sellers and even your marketers really process and understand what that buyer journey looks like?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge for us is uh, enterprise iPaaS is as Gartner would say, it's the fastest growing B2B application. It is an infrastructure product that is really solving problems in ways that buyers don't know how to solve the problem. They typically do it old ways. They build it themselves. They work with a legacy vendor. And for us, it's not just trying to position ourselves as the number one. As an example, G2 rated us number one overall in the consumer ratings as number one iPaaS in the world. But it's also trying to make sure that we're raising awareness with the right buyers at the right time. So for us, again, when we meet with a prospect, it's usually a lot of discovery, a lot of understanding. But for our sellers and our customer-facing teams, it's so important for them to have the context of what was the buyer searching for? What did they learn before we met? How do we really pick up from where they left off rather than starting the process over and over again? So that's where we find the biggest value, in addition to answering the question of
Mm,
where do we invest more money? Where
yeah,
is marketing working? How can we reinforce
yeah,
your message?
right. Like, what's the ROI, and
Yeah.
how do I optimize for that?
Hmm.
So kind of moving, a little bit more into the AI side. Like, you and I sat down. God, it must have been last January now. I remember you and I sat down, had a beer together with Nick on our team.
Hmm.
We were going over a lot of stuff. But one of the things we started just kind of riffing on a little bit was like how cool. Like, we were talking about generative AI. We were talking about like all the new models, ChatGPT that was dropping at the time, Bard, at now Gemini from Google, and some of the things that were coming out. And we started talking about how do these tools start to apply to help with some of the problems that you're seeing, right? And we started to talk a little bit about, like, you've got these complex buyer journeys that span, lots of people, lots of different types of events, and how do you take, maybe leverage these tools to take those buyer journeys and consolidate them down? Like, maybe you could kind of talk about some of the things that we were talking about and some of the things that you kind of got pretty excited about when you started thinking
Mhm.
about kind of merging these technologies together.
Yeah, that was a really great discussion. It's so cool to see everything come together
Yeah.
today. So that first point,
Yeah.
it's from beginning to end. For me, I think there's a couple parts to that was exciting. The first is, I've been in marketing operations and sales operations for over a decade, and I remember about 5 years ago was sort of this renaissance of SaaS applications, and they came out with a big document which showed the millions of SaaS apps customer people could
Yeah.
buy,
Yeah.
which is still present, but now AI is really that new unknown territory. And really, we're only limiting AI based on our own creativity at this point. And sometimes it can be more creative for us as is. But for me, as we thought about this, there's two kind of users that I think of, well, three technically, but there's the classic operations analysts, whether it's sales or marketing, and they know their stuff. They know how to get around data. They know how to pull it, query it, understand it, translate it. But then there's a segment below, which is sometimes a junior analyst, or it's a salesperson or a customer facing person who has questions, but they have no idea how to get to the answer. So they typically call operations and ask for some data. And then there's the other subset, which is the sort of, I would say, the analytical executive. And here at Celigo, as an example, we are a really modern company, and our executives are really great with data. They know how to ask all the right questions, but they too don't have access to all the data. So it comes to this pressure point of the operations team. So for me, I think one of the most interesting things is really seeing how AI and large language models can sort of unlock all of this really important data that we
Right.
can pull together.
Yeah, and to some extent, it's how do you get that information out to these people so that they're not always coming to you. Like I think about the executive example, and a lot of our customers have said, "Hey, we're a small team, and if I can't get them to use the product directly, they're just coming to me and asking me questions. So I got to run in there and find things and get stuff. And sometimes it's hard what is the question they're really asking? What is the information I got to go find? So having something that has that layer there is really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm gonna kind of jump over to you because, you know, you and I recently just got back from kind of Google Next, and out of that we were really kind of analyzing and looking at a lot of the technology that Google is bringing to market around AI, right? And we're pretty embedded there because Google's kind of our stack and how we build a lot of our technology. And one of the things that you and I discussed was how do we solve this problem that Brian and I were talking about? And you kind of went ahead and started kind of prototyping and some building some stuff in our product. What were some like when we step back like tell us about kind of a little bit about this feature and a little bit about like the back. What does it take to kind of make something like this happen?
Yeah, so it's still in its nascent phase of its development, right?
Yeah,
So we look back like the beginning of LLM and generative AI when it first came on the scene. You really needed a sophisticated data scientist that not only knew the science and the modeling, but also the data engineering. And then there's the front end piece. Like, really need somebody that knew end to end how to make an AI model usable by someone and deliver value. And that's changed a lot. Like as you mentioned, we saw at Google Next, a lot of strides have been made towards making generative AI more accessible, more usable at scale, and by teams that maybe don't have the sophisticated technology resources, at hand to build out a feature around it. And so that's what we're using now. Is we're using the Vertex AI APIs that Google has implemented, and it's been night and day since I guess it's only been a year ago, maybe a little more,
mm-hmm.
since we started, going down this path. And since then, it's become it's night and day in terms of implementation, integration, and usage of these APIs.
Yeah,
So there's the technical side, the modeling. The modeling side is kind of handled by Google already, using their built-in PaLM models and other models that they have at hand. But then also the prompt engineering has become much more reliable, and lots more documentation around it to allow folks like us, companies like us to to build features that can deliver reliable value to our customers.
Yeah. It's interesting because one of the things that we've seen is that it's very easy, it's not very easy, but it's getting access to the LLMs and generative AI technology is somewhat like, okay, it's out there, it's available. But the challenge is if you don't have the right data to feed it, what does it do? Right. And so one of the things I think that we're seeing is so powerful is when you have data that you've then gone through the hard work of doing all that data, integration and stitching and working to create a data set that's actually has really good information in it, has your buyer journeys embedded in it, has everything stitched together. Then when you combine that with something like a generative AI, I think that's where you start to unleash the power. So it's like you've got raw data, like in our system, we pull from Salesforce and Marketo and Eloqua and all the websites. Like we're pulling all this data, stitching it together, creating this data set, right, that we're running all of our analytics on. But there's huge amount of information in there. And the question is, how do you get that information out to people, really? And how do you release it out of those systems?
Well, everybody has different questions too. All different roles in the organization from low level to high level. It's impossible to predict all the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Now, Nolan, one of the things that you and I talked about when we started down this was, okay, this is great, this is awesome, but our customers, being more kind of B2B, mid-size on up from enterprises, anything from 500 people to 50,000 people, they have real security concerns about this stuff, right? And so you and I kind of really long discussion about, okay, how do you build this? How do you architect it in a way that allows these companies to access this data and this power without any risk to their data, right? And this is actually something we've had a lot of discussions with Google about because they're actually hyper-focused and this is one of their value adds in the market. Maybe you could walk us through a little bit about how that kind of plays in here and how we get to the point where we can use this technology, but make, to be honest, the lawyers at the companies that we're working with comfortable with us using this technology and around their data.
Yeah. So Google saw this coming a mile away, and they've baked in all of these answers to these questions into their data governance and their terms of service for all of their features that reside within Google Cloud, particularly with BigQuery, our data warehouse of choice, and Vertex AI. All of the data that is consumed by these features stay within the Google Cloud project for each customer. And the way CaliberMind is architected, each customer is within their own project. There's no commingling of customer data,
right,
in our system. And so what that allows us to do is leverage all of these guardrails that Google has implemented to separate each customer's data from not only other customers but Google itself. Google has made strides in their data governance and their rules around it. And if you go on their website, it's everywhere. And it says that Google does not use any of the data in Google Cloud projects to train their AI models. The data that's in those projects belong to the customers. And so what that allows us to do is pass on those very stringent data governance rules to our customers, so they can trust that their data is safe and not being shared outside of that project.
Yeah. Something that's very different. Like if you go and you just go on the open web and you hit Gemini or you hit, ChatGPT or something and you paste stuff in, it's really unclear whose data that is suddenly, right? And so to architect a system that's, acceptable for real businesses, B2B companies and organizations, you need to have this data governance built into it. You need to have this separation so that that when you're taking your data and hitting the LLM, it's kind of self-contained. It's in that one box, never leaves it. And then if the company decides, hey, we need to stop this or whatever, they can turn it off and delete all that data and all that information, right?
Yep.
With that, we're going to jump in and actually, this is what we call tool time. I can't tell you how excited I've seen this. So, Brian, we're going to dig into the product now. So I'm going to share here.
Okay.
My screen. Okay. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So you're familiar with this, Brian, obviously CaliberMind. But what we're going to do is we're actually looking at Celigo, your company, right? And standard engagement interface. And what we've done is, and again, I want to stress, this is an early kind of prototype of what we're kind of building. We're going to be architecting this a little bit more seamlessly into the application, right? But we
Mhm.
want it to be able to kind of get to the point where we can start to test out and prove out the capabilities here, right? So you'll see here, here's a buyer journey, right? Looks like a spreadsheet. All the events, and we actually send this. A lot of our customers, you guys are logging in and doing stuff in the product, right? So a lot of this is you guys kind of logging in, using the product in the buyer journey. And I'll show a prospect here in a second. But it's all summarized in this great table, and you can see like, is the engagement going up? What's happening? What are key events? You could filter. It's a good way of looking at it. But it's hard for somebody who isn't familiar with this data to kind of jump in here and see what's going on.
Mhm.
So we've added, this is the first time you're seeing this, summarize. Boom.
Hmm.
So it takes that entire buyer journey and actually runs it through a Gemini, large language model, and actually figures out and summarizes all that information up, figuring out the top decision makers, the marketing activities, and the buyer journey, kind of summarizes it right here. And I'll give you a second to kind of see, how close is this to like, way back in January when you and I were kind of like say riffing on kind of hitting the target of that.
I think it nails it.
Yeah.
This is the perfect example of you want to share the data, but you don't need to teach everyone how to uncover the data.
Yeah.
And it's also fascinating when you look just in our case of our top decision makers. So
Yep.
Maria is our marketing ops leader. She's the
Mm-hmm.
one really leading the charge in terms of deploying and
Yep.
implementing and
Yep.
rolling out to our teams. Jerry is he's on the ops team and he's a builder. He's building all the Celigo IO connections between CaliberMind and all of our data sets. So
Yep.
Derek runs our sales ops team. So you've got marketing ops, sales ops, and our builder and sales ops. So summarize the right three people.
Yeah, I'm glad it at least got that close.
Yeah.
We've also built in the ability to refresh because this is what's interesting, and this is where we're still kind of experimenting and playing with it and prompt engineering and how to lay this stuff out.
Mhm.
The hard part with these is getting it to be consistent, right? So I hit refresh, it'll hit it again and use that same prompt, and it's going to look a little different, which is kind of interesting, and it's fun to play with it, but it's also the challenge of like, now how do we get this consistent enough to be, it's like, you see, now I got it kind of a little bit more detail in this time, right?
Mhm.
A lot more information. I'm like, I'm not sure I love it. A lot more people showing up as top decision makers.
Mhm.
Okay, maybe I want to actually refresh it again and get it down. Like this is where we're starting to really, this is why we're kind of saying, okay, we need a little bit of time to kind of, really bake this in, because for businesses to use this data needs to be more consistent. It needs to
Mhm.
show the stuff in a more consistent way. It needs to be trained a little better, right?
Mhm.
Um, and that's kind of what we're working on in the background, is how do you make it kind of come up with the same information relatively consistently every time? And it's hard because the large language models, they're this giant, set of numbers that just kind of outputs, basically predicts what it wants to send out, right?
Yep.
Um, how do you get it to do that? Right. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah,
Like
prompt
the sheer,
engineering is so tricky. We have an amazing prompt engineer
yeah,
in our team who's
yeah,
everything he does is just shocking how he can answer these questions. I see the value in consistency, and it's totally
yeah,
important. But
yeah,
there is some value in sort of spinning the wheel a little bit. Like
yeah,
let's roll the dice. What's it gonna
yeah,
uncover
yeah,
next? And
yeah. Like, is it going to give me something a little bit more, a little bit different, a little bit more information about what's in there?
yeah, and
Um,
AI, all of these models and GPT, I find the most value in, yes, delivering the answers, but it's almost helping me brainstorm, like, take me down a path so I can
yeah,
start to think about a problem differently. And this, in a way, this kind of can do that.
yeah. Especially if you're delivering this to a salesperson, somebody who really needs to understand the account, because the way we're seeing, like we've shown this to a couple of their accounts, and the first thing they said was like, essentially, is how fast can I get this in front of my salespeople? And the reason was, they're like, I need them, like, right before they go and they jump on a call with the customer or they try to do something, they need to see this and just kind of refresh what's going on with this account. Okay, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this. Who have we talked to, right? Because a good set of sales reps, they've got a lot of accounts they're working on. Or if it's an
Mhm.
SDR team, these things are kind of coming in at them, and they got to make a phone call. They just need to quick bring it up. Let me see what's going on. Okay, now it's time to reach out. Or on the
Mm-hmm.
marketing side, it's like, okay, we just had a, 5 or 6 accounts that we just won. They're, like we've got our, buyer journey analysis tools, like, and that's highlighting saying these accounts are really kind of moving through your funnel really well. You should look at them. And there they want to kind of really get a good feel. It's a lot easier than looking at this table to say, okay, what did they do? What really worked? Okay, let me look at the other one. What did they do? What's the similarity between these accounts?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to jump
Yeah,
over.
and there's almost a couple different questions that you could prompt this with. Is
Yeah,
I looked at the last roll of the dice that we got, and I saw my boss was on the site, and it was
yeah,
really interesting.
yeah,
And
yeah. I saw that too, James. Yeah.
sort of like who are the users, who are the leaders, who are the influencers in the account that I should know about. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and I'm gonna jump into that in a second. I'm gonna hit summarize here on this account. So here's like a prospect. And it's interesting because this one, summarizes who's out there, what's going on. This a little bit more. So your team is more using, this team is more evaluating, right?
Mhm.
So what marketing activities do they actually integrate with, right? And some of the things that we're now looking at is like, okay, so how do we take, and this is, to be honest, just taking our raw tables and dropping them in here and using them, right? We're going to be working on creating more of a bespoke data set to feed in there that, to be honest, has more data, more information. For instance, maybe the email content
Mhm.
itself goes in with this, right?
Yeah.
Because that email is flowing in. We even thought about what if you were to feed in, every time you do a meeting with the customer, feed that in here with it, and you can actually ask questions against it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things you talked about when we were having some cold ones, it was
Mhm.
essentially the idea of the regression analysis to really
Yeah.
understand, which engagement types work
Yeah.
best in the flow. And I think that's sort of dovetails into this as well. And
Yeah.
using these LLMs, and we're doing it at Celigo too, is dropping in recordings from calls and understanding intent and understanding likelihood to close based on the customer sentiment. And I think you could pull some of that out of what you have here as well, and just understanding, is this buyer following the trail that you want them to? Are they showing positive signals?
Yeah. And the one thing we're now testing out, and Nolan, maybe you could talk to this, is you and I were in there yesterday testing out actually querying against this data, right?
Mm-hmm.
And saying, okay, what does it take to like I've got this, but then have a box underneath it where the salesperson can actually say, okay, now help me understand this. And some things we're testing is like, okay, one thing is like, well, tell me more about alert media. Tell me what they do. And boom, it popped up and it said, okay, well, here's what alert media does, right? Now, what are some of the things that you're thinking about how to kind of build more of that intelligence into the platform and the system so that it goes a little deeper? So you get the summary, but then people can start to actually do that querying against the data and combining sort of this general knowledge about things with the really specific knowledge we have around buyer journeys intent and what's going on with the first party data.
Yeah, I think the next few iterations of this are just going to be about adding more and more data to the underlying model, so that it has more data to pull from when it delivers a response. And so what that's allow users to do is, maybe we have one prompt that is for all of engagement, and you can do things like compare this engagement with this company to this other company, and why are they different? Why is this one doing better than the other one? And
Mm-hmm.
then see what kind of responses it returns.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really going to be about model training and the data engineering side of AI features like this.
Yeah. One of the things I remember you and I talked about was you were saying, hey, there's the ability with some of the tech that we have access to do, the grounding, right? Where you
Mhm.
actually load a vector database full of the data kind of already set up with all the similarity analysis kind of already built in. And
Mhm.
then being able to kind of use that as the basis for a lot of these queries and this information. So there's a lot of depth in it. Here you're feeding in like it's everything about this company, right? It kind of stays there, but you have the ability to really feed in with some of these technologies and ground it in a specific customer's data. I just want to get back to the security piece of that, which is you're
Mhm.
grounding it in a customer's first party data, but nothing else,
That's right.
right? There's no mixing of data between this customer. And you want that because so your business is very different than, one of our like ADP, one of our other customers. Like you guys
Mhm.
aren't at all the same. Like you don't want them to think that you look like them, right? You want to
Right.
be only on how you guys do work.
That's
When
right.
our personas are different, our buyers buy different, they're in
Yeah.
different buying cycles. It's yeah,
Buyer
very
groups are
different.
different. Yeah. Yeah. And then what do you see as sort of like, and we'll kind of wrap on this with you is like the next steps, the things that you really see kind of coming out of this.
Yeah, it's going to be more and more chat-like in its appearance, and you'll I think you'll see more areas in an application where you want to ask more questions, follow-up questions. Okay, this buyer journey is great. Tell me about its attribution in relation to engagement.
Yeah.
Tell me about the latest revenue forecast, things like that maybe aren't in the data but are public knowledge. Maybe starting to pull in that, combining it with your data to have these very robust interactions
Yeah.
with the chatbot. I think that there's a lot of opportunity there for just living in the data and asking natural language questions and
Right.
returning lots of good
Getting the
value.
answers and stuff you need back. Yeah.
I have about 25 questions I can ask right now, Nolan. So maybe we could talk and I'll share those with you.
Yeah. So, Brian, like final reaction to kind of what you're seeing again. And the reason I wanted you on was, just because you and I had this conversation, and it was something that, we've been talking about internally for a while and actually playing with, right? And we finally, kind of got to the point where the tech and everything is kind of coming together to the point where it's like, I don't think it was prime time yet, but it's getting pretty close. Like, we'll probably release this out to customers. I won't say because no one will get mad at me for committing our engineering team to stuff, but not too far in the future, this is going to come out live for our customers, at least at this sort of initial system. But like your quick final reactions, what you're seeing, thoughts on it?
I love it. It's great to see. The thing that I've seen CaliberMind evolve ever since, the first days 6 years ago. And it's just really cool to see the product evolve. And it's even more interesting to see how quickly CaliberMind responds to a market dynamic such as AI and Gemini. I think it nails it. It sort of frees the team to answer their questions without the need of an analyst. Allows the users to build. And it's aligns with Celigo's use cases. We believe marketing ops should be builders. They should be building their own integrations. And similarly, we believe sales should be querying the database and getting the answers that they need without a science degree.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
I think it's
absolutely.
awesome.
Yeah, I think that I'll kind of wrap on that. Is I think out there's a lot of data, a lot of information that people really want to leverage, but the
Mhm.
tools that allow you to leverage that data right now really require a very high level of analytic skill,
Mhm.
right? That many of the people in these business functions don't have and don't really need to have for most
Mhm.
of their jobs. How do you take that and get it to them? And I think this really starts to point the way toward being able to really release that power and that data. As long as you can build the data and get into that format that you need, right? That's kind of required out to these organizations. Well, I think
Great
that
job.
wraps up. Yeah, go ahead. Last.
Just great job. Really great to see
Yeah.
Nolan and Eric. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks. Okay, well, that wraps up this episode of Funnel Love Fridays. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Nolan, for joining. Really appreciate it. And join us next week when Drew Smith from Attributa joins us to continue the conversation about sort of like how large enterprises are deploying AI to optimize their funnel. Great. Thanks all.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks.